Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining in. We shall just wait for a couple of more seconds before we allow everybody from in the waiting room to enter, and then we shall begin. Okay, hello, everyone. I'm taking this opportunity to extend a warm welcome to you all on behalf of Women4Biodiversity and UNEP-WCMC for this information session on the indicator methodology to measure progress towards Target 23 of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. Before we begin, I would like to go over a few house rules for today. Uh, First and foremost, we have translations available in French and Spanish. So you could click on the globe icon at the bottom right of your screen and select the language that you want to hear the session in. We would also encourage you to change your Zoom name to reflect your name and the name of your organization. We are recording the session and it will be available on our website and social media pages in English, Spanish, and French. And we are also currently live streaming the session on YouTube. Captions are also available for this meeting, and you can click on the show captions at the bottom of your screen. However, the captions are only available in English. We would also request you to mute your microphone when our panelists are speaking. We also have various channels of communication that you can use to communicate your questions, thoughts, and suggestions to us. Please click on the Q&A option at the bottom of your screen to type in specific questions. Please use the chat box for suggestions and comments. And for those of you who would like to post anonymous comments, we have enabled the notes feature. Please feel free to write your comments on the notes feature if you wish to do so anonymously. Before we start, I would just want to take you through the agenda for today. We will open the session and with a welcome by Women4Biodiversity. After this, the WCMC team will then take us through the draft indicator methodology, and we shall have about 40 minutes for a discussion on the proposed draft, where we shall address your comments, questions, and queries. Again, we encourage you to kindly post your questions and comments in the Q&A box, comments in the chat box, and notes feature as you go through the session. I would now like to introduce our panelists. Gillian Campbell, who is the head for monitoring, review, and reporting of the CBD. She will be joining us shortly. She is the head of the monitoring, review, and reporting at the Convention on Biological Diversity, where she has led the development and operationalization of the monitoring framework for the KM-GBF. She also manages efforts related to planning, monitoring, and reporting of parties to the convention. We also have Renalini Rai, who is the director for Women4Biodiversity. She has several years' experience of advocating for the rights of Indigenous people, local communities, women, and youth at various international forums. She has also served as an Indigenous advisor and gender expert for different organizations. From the WCMC team, we have Kira Booth, who is the program officer at the Nature, Gender, and Rights Focal Initiative at UNEP-WCMC. And we also have Catherine Despot Bellomonte, who is the Nature, Gender, and Rights lead at the UNEP World Conservation Monitoring Center. We also have Aisha Vijaysekhara, who is the Associate Program Officer at the Nature, Gender, and Rights Focal Initiative. We will also be joined by Claudia Faustino, who supports projects across UNEP-WCMC with modeling and analysis, technical writing, and project management. I would like to now invite Mrinalini to open the session and welcome our panelists. Mrinalini, the floor is yours.
Hello, everybody. Just to check with if everybody can my recording. And
Yeah, we
to
can hear you,
confirm if
Mrinalini.
you can also hear, hopefully not this French, because I'm also doing the French recording. So first, thank you so very much. Dear colleagues, friends, esteemed delegates, and honored guests, and who have joined us today from all the different time zones. It's my distinct pleasure to extend a warm welcome to each of you as we convene a discussion and deliberate on the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. Before I go in, can you tell me whether we can see the duplication of the vocal of the recording, the interpretation French and mine? If it's only English, then I will continue. Meenal, can you give me a heads up that you can only hear me in English?
Yeah, I can only hear you in English.
Okay, fine. Then thank you. That's great. So thank you again very much for joining us. And here we are to discuss and deliberate upon the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework and its associated monitoring framework. This gathering meets a significant milestone in our collective efforts to address the urgent challenges facing our planet's biodiversity and ecosystem. As countries navigate the complexities of biodiversity conservation, it becomes increasingly evident that gender considerations play a crucial role in shaping conservation outcomes. Women, who often serve as primary caregivers and resource managers, possess invaluable traditional knowledge and practices that contribute to the preservation of biodiversity. However, gender disparities persist, limiting women's access to resources, decision-making processes, and opportunity to leadership in conservation efforts. What I just talked about and shared, this is not something new. We all know about it, but it's really time to really address it in a transformative way. As you know, the Convention on Biological Diversity, the CBD, stands at a pivotal international agreement, providing a comprehensive framework for addressing the global challenges of biodiversity loss. Because, and many of you maybe attended at the end of 2020 at the CBD COP16, the parties to the convention adopted several decisions to pave pathways for living in harmony with nature by 2050. And among those decisions was a momentous step on the adoption of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, or for the KM-GBF, or the Biodiversity Plan. The framework represents a groundbreaking commitment by the international community to halt and reverse the loss of biodiversity by 2030, setting ambitious targets to safeguard our natural heritage for generations to come, including a target on gender equality, target 23. As we embark on this journey together, it is imperative to approach the framework's implementation with a strong emphasis on inclusivity, equity, and accountability, ensuring that the voices of all stakeholders, including marginalized indigenous peoples and local communities, are heard and respected. Also, as a reminder to all of us, COP15 was also instrumental because there was another crucial decision was the adoption of the 2022 to 2030 Gender Plan of Action. Central to the success of these initiatives is the establishment and utilization of indicators, serving as vital tool for assessing progress towards Target 23, which is stream gender equality into biodiversity values and outcomes across society for 2030. Indicators provide a means of measuring and monitoring the effectiveness of conservation efforts, enabling policymakers, practitioners, and stakeholders to identify gaps, track trends, and make informed decisions to safeguard biodiversity for future generations. Now, as we strive to achieve ambitious goals set forth by the CBD and the KM-GBF, development of the implementation of robust indicators become paramount. By measuring the integration of biodiversity values into national and local policies, plans, and processes, indicators offer a tangible way to hold governments and stakeholders accountable for their commitments. Moreover, they facilitate the identification of areas requiring additional attention and investment, guiding efforts towards more effective and equitable conservation strategies. In this way, indicators play a crucial role in shaping the trajectory of global biodiversity conservation, ensuring that we remain on course towards a more sustainable and biodiversity future. And this session that we've organized is just to do that, address that. So I encourage all participants to actively engage in discussions, share insights, and collaborations on strategies for advancing gender equality and biodiversity conservation. Together, we can harness the power of data, advocacy, collective actions to create a more sustainable and equitable future of all. We'll also share that to address this information session, we organized 2 information sessions, which are organized able to accommodate most of the time zones. We always know that we always have had a challenge of time zones, so we really tried hard to do that. And to be able to share and gather initial inputs to this deliberation, it's practical to host an open discussion with parties to the convention, UN entities, major stakeholders, and observers of the CBD. And to be honest, actually for anyone interested in following and contributing to this process, to collectively co-develop and having ownership of this work. So thank you for your participation, and I look forward to productive and enlightening webinar. Thank you so much, Meenal.
Thank you, Mrinalini. Before we dive into the draft indicator methodology, I would like to provide a bit of a context to the session. As we all know, and as Mrinalini has already taken us through this, parties to the CBD via Decision 15-4 adopted the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. According to Section CH of the Convention, its successful implementation will depend on ensuring gender equality and the empowerment of women and girls, and on reducing inequality. Further, the framework also contains Target 23 to ensure gender equality and a gender-responsive approach to be adopted for biodiversity action. Along with this, there were a host of decisions adopted at COP15. This includes a detailed monitoring framework which comprised of a set of agreed indicators for tracking progress towards goals and targets of the framework. It includes headline indicators, which are recommended for national, regional, and global monitoring, and more detailed component and complementary indicators. Target 23, as we can see, had 3 component indicators and 6 complementary indicators. And one of the component indicator was the Gender Plan of Action to support and promote the gender-responsive implementation of the Global Biodiversity Framework. The Gender Plan of Action will also support a gender-responsive approach to applying the implementation mechanisms associated with the framework. But we believe that there are some key gaps in the suite of indicators in the monitoring framework that relate to gender equality. As we can see, there is no headline indicator for Target 23, and instead a binary indicator has been proposed to be the main measure to track progress of Target 23. The indicators on national implementation of the Gender Plan of Action lacks a developed methodology. However, this also poses as a very good opportunity to address these gaps. And the Women for Biodiversity and UNEP-WCMC, with the support of SwedBio, have developed a draft methodology for the national implementation of the Gender Plan of Action, which can help parties work towards the full, inclusive, effective, and gender responsive implementation of the Global Biodiversity Framework. We therefore organized 2 virtual information sessions across 2 days and different time zones to accommodate different stakeholders and parties. The first session was held on the 24th, and the second is today on the 26th. In these sessions, we plan to introduce the draft indicator methodology to parties, major stakeholders, observers of the CBD, so that you can share your comments, observations, and questions with us, and it can be co-developed in time to present it at COP16 this year. The draft is available to download, and we shall share the links in the chat box as well. I will now hand over the floor to Kira Booth to introduce us to the draft indicator methodology. I would again encourage you all to type your questions in the Q&A box, to address your general comments and suggestions on the chat box, and on the notes feature if you would like to do so anonymously. Over to you, Kira. Thank you.
Thanks, Minal. Okay, so welcome everyone, and it's my pleasure to walk you through the draft indicator methodology for Target 23. I am going to very briefly recap on Target 23 since this is the target that this indicator methodology relates to. So I think the message here is really important to get across. So Target 23 of the Global Biodiversity Framework relates to ensuring gender equality in the implementation of the framework through a gender-responsive approach where all women and girls have equal opportunity and capacity to contribute to the 3 objectives of the Convention. We're just on that's it, exactly, that's the slide. I want to highlight that this target does not only relate to ensuring women's equal participation in processes related to the implementation of the framework, but also addresses many other necessary priority areas. For example, ensuring women and girls' ownership and control over land and access to natural resources, promoting women's empowerment in biodiversity-based supply chains, developing national capacity to produce and use biodiversity and gender data, and allocating adequate human and financial resources to support human rights-based and gender-responsive implementation of the Global Biodiversity Framework, just to name a few. Next slide, please. So as we heard at COP15, parties also adopted the ambitious Gender Plan of Action, which, if implemented, will contribute towards the achievement of Target 23. For this reason, the monitoring framework included an indicator specifically on the national implementation of the Gender Plan of Action. However, as we heard, that indicator lacked a developed methodology. So this is what we set out to do, to co-develop a methodology with parties to the CBD, observers and major groups to make sure this component indicator is ready for use by COP16. This component indicator encompasses all elements of Target 23 and as such would provide a robust measure to assess progress towards Target 23 and the gender responsive implementation of the GBF. And I really want to emphasize that what we are presenting today is a first draft for further development, and finalizing this methodology requires a collaborative effort, and inputs and feedbacks from parties, major groups, and observers are vital to ensure we have a robust indicator by COP16. That's great. We can stay on the current slide. Before I present the indicator methodology, I just want to recap on the crucial elements contained within the Gender Plan of Action. So the Gender Plan of Action contains 3 expected outcomes which specifically relate to the 3 components of Target 23. Linked to those outcomes are specific objectives, along with a set of indicative actions that will enable parties to achieve the corresponding objectives. The Gender Plan of Action also provides examples of possible deliverables that could be produced as an outcome of the indicative actions, and it also includes which actors are responsible for implementing each of those indicative actions. Next slide, please. So what does this indicator methodology consist of? The indicator methodology has 2 main components. So firstly, it includes a set of multiple choice survey questions that are based on the indicative actions listed in the Gender Plan of Action, and specifically those indicative actions that parties are the main responsible actors for. So in the Gender Plan of Action, parties are listed as the leading responsible actor for 18 out of 30 of the indicative actions. Therefore, the survey is comprised of 18 questions based on those indicative actions. To avoid any possible variation from what's stated in the Gender Plan of Action, these 18 survey questions were developed using the exact wording as what's stated in the Gender Plan of Action. Secondly, answers submitted by parties to these multiple choice questions are calculated into an index, which are then translated into a numerical value or score that can be tracked over time up to 2030. I'll go into more depth on the index calculations later in the presentation. It's important to highlight here that in order to be consistent with other indicators in the monitoring framework, we've used the same indicator methodology and the same methods for calculating an index as with other targets in the monitoring framework. Next slide, please. So the draft indicator methodology has been made available so that you can look at the full list of draft survey questions. And my colleagues will share links in the chat, as Minal mentioned, where you can find and download the draft methodology. But here, we would like to just show you a few representative examples of the survey questions taken from the indicative actions of the Gender Plan of Action that will be included in the survey for this component indicator methodology. So one of the indicative actions in the Gender Plan of Action relates to taking measures to update national legislation so that all women and girls have equitable access to ownership and control over biological resources, as well as land and waters. So what we have done is to translate this indicative action into a question using the exact same language as the Gender Plan of Action, which in this case is, has your country taken measures to update national legislation so that all women and girls have equitable access to ownership and control over biological resources, as well as land and waters? And we've provided optional answers along a range that, when calculated into an index, will help to show the progress of parties towards implementing this indicative action. So the optional answers here include yes, national legislation provides equal rights of access, ownership, and control over biological resources, land, and waters. Yes, partially, in the process of updating legislation to ensure equal access to ownership and control over biological resources, land, and waters. No, but planned. No, not at this time. And we've also included an optional response for, if available, provide examples. Responses to this particular option will not be used in the calculation of the score, but it will be really useful for gathering case studies, best practices, and lessons learned to support peer-to-peer learning among parties. Next slide, please. So here we have our second sample survey question. And this is another example of a survey question that's been developed from one of the indicative actions and is framed as: has your country appointed a national gender biodiversity focal point to support knowledge exchange, sharing experiences, best practices, peer-to-peer learning, mentoring, and coaching? Where the options range from yes, a national gender biodiversity focal point has been appointed and are fully engaged in activities. Yes, partially, a national gender biodiversity focal point has been appointed, but activities have yet to be carried out. No, but planned, and no, not at this time, and if available, provide examples. Next slide, please. So in some instances where an indicative action includes multiple elements or activities, this may require more than one optional response. So in these instances, the survey question is provided in a select all that apply format. In this way, parties can report more specifically on which elements of this indicative action have been implemented. So let me walk you through this example that we have on the slide. The question is, does your country have specific measures in place to respect, preserve, and maintain the traditional knowledge, innovations, and practices of all women and girls from Indigenous peoples and local communities, as well as their corresponding rights relevant to the conservation and sustainable use of diversity? And here we have two select all that apply options. The first one is there are specific measures and policies in place to protect the traditional knowledge, innovations, and practices of women and girls from Indigenous peoples and local communities. Option B, there are specific measures and policies in place to protect the rights of women and girls from Indigenous peoples and local communities relevant to the conservation and sustainable use of biological diversity. We also have here option C, no but planned, and D, no, not at this time, and again, the opportunity to provide examples. Just on a technical note here, that if you select any of the options in the select all that apply category, this rules out the possibility to select options for no but planned or no, not at this time. Next slide, please. So here is another demonstrative example of a question that is provided in a select all that apply format. The question here is, has your country undertaken research and analysis and collected and applied information and data, including gender differentiated traditional knowledge, on the gender differentiated impacts of the implementation of the Global Biodiversity Framework and the role of all women and girls as agents of change? As you can see, this question encompasses multiple elements. So we have divided this into two select all that apply options, which are research and analysis have been undertaken and the information and data from this analysis, including gender differentiated traditional knowledge, have been used to identify the gender differentiated impacts of the Global Biodiversity Framework. And option B, research and analysis have been undertaken and the information and data from this analysis, including gender differentiated traditional knowledge, has been used to identify the role of all women and girls as agents of change. And of course, we have the remaining optional answers there as well. Next slide, please. So now I'll go into a bit more detail on how the answers submitted in the survey are translated into numerical values to help monitor progress over time. So the first step involves converting nuanced survey responses into numerical values. These responses represent a continuous scale of values on a scale between 0 to 100%. For the single choice questions, meaning those that range from yes to no, not at this time, the survey responses provided by parties correspond to a particular value. So answering yes produces a numerical score of 100%, Answering yes partially produces a numerical score of 66%. Answering no but planned produces a score of 33%. And no, not at this time is equivalent to a score of 0%. For the survey questions that provide select or that apply options, if you tick all of the select that or that apply options, it will produce a numerical value of 100%. And if you select some of the all that apply options, but not all of them, this will produce a numerical score of 66%. And as with the single choice questions, selecting no but planned produces a numerical score of 33%. And no, not at this time produces a score of 0%. Next slide, please. So, as I said at the beginning, the Gender Plan of Action is organized according to 3 expected outcomes that, if achieved, will result in successful implementation of Target 23. And under those expected outcomes are a number of indicative actions. So in order to calculate an overall score to show progress towards each of those intended outcomes, the survey responses submitted are calculated to find an arithmetic mean of the responses. As a next step, in order to aggregate the scores according to the 3 expected outcomes of the Gender Plan of Action, the method involves calculating a geometric mean, which allows us to take into account and compare differences in progress for each of the 3 expected outcomes of the Gender Plan of Action. Next slide, please. So, if we just hop one back, that's it, great. So to show you what this looks like in practice, we've created a hypothetical calculation for a country that we will refer to here as country A. So as you can see in this table, country A has submitted responses to the survey questions, and those questions and responses are categorized according to the 3 expected outcomes of the Gender Plan of Action. The table shows which responses were provided to each of the survey questions by country A. Next slide. Those responses provided by country A are then used to calculate a mean score for country A against each of the expected outcomes of the Gender Plan of Action, as demonstrated by the table on the left. Then a geometric mean is taken to provide an overall score of progress for country A against this indicator on national implementation of the Gender Plan of Action. So using this example, as you can see on the right-hand table, the progress of country A towards national implementation of the Gender Plan of Action is 64%. Next slide. So there are different ways that this score could be interpreted. And one interpretation would be by showing that country A has a score of 64% in terms of their progress towards implementation of Target 23. Or the results could be presented using a range or a traffic light system, where an index smaller than 33% suggests that further action is needed. An index between 33 and 66% suggests that there has been some progress towards the target, and an index greater than 66% suggests that the country is on track to achieve this target. Next slide, please. So now that we have presented the draft indicator methodology for national implementation of the Gender Plan of Action, we'll shortly move into a question and answer session. But we are very, very keen to hear feedback on this indicator from those of you in the audience who are here representing your parties, major stakeholder groups, and observers. And in particular, we would like to know whether you foresee any limitations with the proposed methodology for this component indicator, whether you think that there are any key aspects that are currently missing from the draft methodology, and whether you have any suggestions for how this draft methodology can be improved. My colleagues who worked on the index and the calculation aspects of the indicator are here on the call as well, in case you have any technical questions around that. Next slide. In case you would like to submit comments, suggestions, or questions on this draft indicator methodology after this session, you can find the draft methodology using the links shown on the screen. And please email your feedback to my colleague Aisha using the email address provided on the screen in front of you. You're welcome to download a Word version of the draft indicator methodology and add your comments directly into the document and send it to Aisha. And that brings me to my final slide, which is just to say thank you for listening. And I'm now going to pass back to Minal, who will take us into the Q&A, and welcome my colleagues Catherine, Aisha, and Claudia, who are also here to respond to any questions or comments that you might have. Thank you.
Thank you, Kira. We would now go into the question and answer session. I don't see a lot of questions. So maybe I can start off. One of the key documents which is 26.2, does not show the gender plan of action as a component indicator anymore. So how do we plan to work towards getting this in again and then use this methodology and ensure that the methodology is taken up by the CBD and the parties? So I'd like to open up the question for
I'm happy to respond to that, but I can see that James Williams, who's the co-chair of the ATEC on indicators, probably has an answer on this. James, over to you.
Thank you very much indeed, and thank you for an interesting presentation. Appreciate the amount of work that has gone into the development work so far. In terms of what is currently within the SBSTTA 26.2 paper, the RTEG reviewed all of the component and complementary indicators that were in the decision 15.5, and we removed those indicators for which there was not currently, and I stress currently, a methodology. And the reason for that was to be able to give advice to parties on indicators that are currently available that they may wish to use in their revised MBSAPs and in the reporting that they will be doing against national targets in their national reports in 2026 and 2029. However, it's expected, it's anticipated that the whole monitoring framework in terms of the availability of indicators will need to continue to develop over time. And particularly if we start looking to 2030 and beyond, and we start looking at how are we going to be able to improve the capacity of parties to be able to respond to the monitoring framework and to be able to develop better ways of measuring progress against all of the targets, then it's clear that new indicators have been developed ever since we started work on the 2010 target and will continue to be developed. And that's a good thing to be happening. So I see the opportunity in terms of develop a methodology, get it into review processes and allow it to then be able to be available for parties to make use. So the work that you are doing here is very valuable. If I can make a couple of quick comments, please, with respect to the methodology, if I may, as in addition to that sort of response. The first one is that the RTEG has made some proposals for changes in language to answers to the questions that for the binary indicators. And what we're suggesting now is that they should be yes, partially, developing, and no. And the reason for that change is language, and we've found that there was some confusion, particularly for non-English speakers, about what some of those partially and underdevelopment meant. So we're trying to clarify that. That is a straight one-to-one match with the existing answer proposals. So that should not be difficult to change. The second one is that we've also done quite a lot of work to review how to bring together the questions for a binary indicator, and we've come up with an aggregation methodology for doing that, which is in INF 14 for Substa 26. And I would recommend having a look at that, because I think that the 6-point ordinal scale that we have proposed may actually be helpful to you in terms of the index that you are considering. I'd be very happy to discuss that further with UNEP-WCMC colleagues, obviously, and I will be in Substa in Nairobi, and I'm happy to discuss that with other colleagues when you are there. I hope that helps.
That was super useful. Thank you, James. And yes, we'll reach out once we had a look at the calculation proposed in the document. Mina, over to you.
We have a question from Sharika. Is there a monitoring and evaluation framework to work simultaneously with the methodology?
I'm not sure what that means. I'm sorry. Maybe if we can give the floor to the person that provided the question to have a better understanding and provide an answer.
Yes, Sharika, do you want to go ahead and ask the question yourself? You can unmute yourself.
Thank you. Good time of day, everyone. I do hope I understand what was presented. There's someone with an open mic, feedback in the background. Could you kindly mute your mic? Yes. So I've looked on the
Astu. Tu as posé la question.
I'll wait until the person has muted their mic.
You can go ahead, Sharika.
All right, thank you. I have not fully conceptualized the methodology, and so that's why I asked the question. And you would have seen a second question that is asked, if there was a pilot for it, or if this is the pilot, like, how do we know the validity and the reliability of this methodology? And when it is proposed to parties, will there be consistent monitoring while it's in place for us to pick up what's happening, and how will that be evaluated? So I am asking the question, with the methodology, do you have a framework that was built with it for monitoring evaluation to see how you monitor that? That's what my question is.
We're in the first stages of developing the methodology. So what we've done is produce an indicator methodology that is very similar to other indexes that carry two-step process of survey questions and then getting a score. So this type of methodology has been tested before, and actually is the methodology that is included also in the Indigenous Navigator that relates to some traditional knowledge indicators, as well as others. But as I noted, this is a first draft. It would be great for the indicator is targeted to parties because it's meant to be used for two purposes. One, to understand the implementation of the Gender Plan of Action, and as a proxy, if the Gender Plan of Action is being implemented, this will show us progress towards the achievement of Target 23. So that's why we're welcoming inputs from parties, major groups, and observers to review the methodology, provide your inputs. The whole purpose is to co-develop this methodology. But in terms of monitoring systems, there's a lot of work that needs to be done for the implementation of all indicators from the monitoring framework. And of course, the implementation of this indicator will be aligned with that current process in the CBD. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you, Catherine. Yes, you did answer my question, and I'll try to give my comment on the form.
We also have Astor who has asked a question. Do you want to unmute yourself and ask the question yourself?
Merci beaucoup. Je voudrais juste vous dire que par rapport à ce que vient de dire tout à l'heure une des participants, que ces indicateurs qu'on puisse être soit disponibles à notre niveau, qu'on puisse maîtriser effectivement cette recherche, ça nous permettra de le faire correctement pour nous permettre quand même de réussir cette méthodologie. Parce que c'est très important quand même, c'est une première, à mon avis, c'est une première expérience. Donc, nous voulons vraiment participer pleinement, avoir ces indicateurs correctement et démarrer cette recherche pour voir maintenant quels résultats ça va nous donner. Merci beaucoup. C'est ça que je voulais vraiment vous dire.
Thank you.
We also have a question by Yune. Yune, if you want to unmute yourself, or I can ask the question for you.
Yeah, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. It's nice to see some familiar faces. Good to see you. Thank you for the initiative. It's a very good starting point. I wonder whether we can unpack the question, because they are packed with many important concepts. And yeah, there is an effort to separate them by breaking them and having partially meeting and fully meeting the question, the indicator. But still, it's not unpacked enough to me. So it is nothing and no but planned, which can be anything, but then anything above, before it fully meets, it can have a full wide range of actions. And so far it looks like the partially meeting is like a catch-all, anything in between. And I don't think that will show you where things are. So I think it is something to think about, to have a layered approach and unpack the question. We can have a number of partial meet, but give some process and also give different weight. Because at the moment, everything is kind of arithmetically weighed. Everything is the same. But maybe something is more important than others, even among, let's say, three categories. And this is a kind of things that need a bit more intellectual the analysis by the methodology group. But I think it may worth the effort. Thank you.
I can have a go at replying part of your question, Yune and Aisha. You can provide further information, as I know that you worked hard on the development of the scoring of the methodology. We understand that the Gender Plan of Action has many elements included in different actions, some more complex than others, and they are multi-layered. What we tried to do with the questions was frame them in the way that they were the wording of the decision that was where this document was adopted. So we didn't want to change much. And for that reason, we think it would be very important for countries to provide examples of what do they mean by progress in each one of the questions. And what the example would do is precisely to promote case studies, best practices, exchange of knowledge exchange in relation to the gender responsive implementation of the framework. We also understand that there are resourcing and technical needs at the national level, and we wanted to produce a methodology that is fairly simple, that can be done, that develops a little bit further this idea of a binary indicator, which currently is the main measure to monitor progress towards Target 23, and we try to align it with that. We understand that ideally we would have a more scientifically robust measure, but we were trying to be practical and also be able to provide a methodology that is available for use by parties at COP16. However, we are seeking inputs and feedback to improve the methodology, and UNA Tina will be organizing an in-person meeting in Nairobi, in SBSTTA. I know that you're based in Nairobi, and it would be great to have you in this meeting to see the possibility to unpack some of these questions. What we didn't want to do is change the wording that was adopted in the Gender Plan of Action, provide a first draft, and if there's appetite for further unpacking and further developing, it'd be great also to hear the thoughts from parties on this. Aisha, is there anything to add in terms of the questions and the index?
Yeah, so these are great questions, and these are definitely something we've been considering and discussing ourselves. Something that we're really trying to balance when we were thinking of sort of the descriptors for differentiating between the yes and the yes partially and the no but planned answer options was trying to keep it open enough, because these are indicative actions and we didn't want to be too prescriptive about what countries have to do to be able, because there's a range of ways that countries could approach meeting these goals and these objectives of in the gender action plan. So we didn't want to be too prescriptive, but obviously then that does create some room for, as you pointed out, more unclear or vague answers that don't capture things so precisely and specifically, and don't, that may be easy to sort of tick box answer. So this would be something, if you have any suggestions, as Catherine already mentioned, if you have input on how we could tailor some of these answer options, or how to make yes partially options or the no but planned more specific, so that they provide something useful and they provide useful information, but not too prescriptive that it creates some kind of plan of this is the only way that these can be achieved. That would be incredibly helpful. So we'd really appreciate that if you have the time. And then also in relation to your question on index weighting or weighting of certain questions, that's something we've also discussed. Our approach for now was that we were keeping the weighting of the questions the same, or we weren't weighting questions differently, because they're obviously following the gender plan of action, and in that there's no particular weighting of questions there. But also, again, if you have suggestions on this, if you have feedback and input, we really welcome it. So yeah, thank you a lot. This was a great input.
Okay, I will definitely look at it. Thank you.
Thanks, Aisha. We have one more question in the Q&A. It's by an anonymous participant. I run a grassroots community-based organization that works on restoration and climate education. seeing a lot of technical words going around. How can we be better involved?
Can you repeat the question? We missed the last bit of the question.
Yes. I run a grassroots community-based organization that works on restoration and climate education. I am seeing a lot of technical words going around. How can we be better involved?
Well, that's a really good question. What we have done is develop a methodology based on the adopted document for the Gender Plan of Action, 1511. But perhaps with the CBD Women Caucus, we could organize a less technical format to discuss some of the issues that are included in the questions. Perhaps that's something that we can follow up if there are grassroots organizations that would be interested in this. This is something that we can explore with Women4Biodiversity and the CBD Women Caucus. But basically, we use the language that was adopted in the CBD decision 1511.
Thanks, Catherine. Beth Roberts has a question from Landesa. Beth, would you like to ask it?
Sure. Thank you so much, Minal. And thank you for the presentation. This is really informative. And again, just wanted to say thanks for the draft. Happy to offer more comments later. So I wanted to ask a question related to the ways in which the component and complementary indicators in Target 23 are, as mentioned in the GAP, are related to other frameworks. So including monitoring and evaluation frameworks under the UNCCD, the SDGs, and the IPBES, and wanted to ask if support to parties already exists for supporting their ability to integrate reporting on the Gender Action Plan and Target 23 with their reporting under those frameworks. If it's considered for support to parties to name those efforts under the optional questions to kind of serve as contributing to any case studies or lessons learned, or if that's something that would be useful. So just wondering if that type of support has already been envisioned or started on, or if it's been considered. Thank you.
I think this is a question more for James than me, but I'll tell you from UNEP-WCMC that we have an indicators team that will be supporting, in partnership with other organizations, will be supporting on enhancing monitoring systems, and we'll be doing this with a sample of countries. I think the different decisions that were adopted at COP15 call for enhancing monitoring and reporting, and this is part of the whole enhancing synergies with other MEAs and with the Agenda 2030 and the SDGs. So there are plans and there are suggestions to do this. I'm not sure how much of this is taking place at the moment. James, on your discussions at the ATEC, where do you have any input for the question just asked? I'm not sure if this, I know that you were busy with finalizing the elements of the monitoring framework, but perhaps this is a question that was raised during your discussions as well. Or Gillian, if you're, I see that you're back here with us. The question was related about enhancing monitoring and reporting to align with other indicator frameworks. If we have any input from colleagues from the ATEC or Gillian that are participating, it would be great to hear from you. Yeah, Gillian.
Hi, I don't know if you can hear me or see me. I was having a little trouble trying to figure it out. Okay. So thank you. And I just wanted to say that I think the amount of work that has been done on this is really impressive. As most of you know, when we're looking at indicators related to gender for the monitoring framework or for NBSAPs or for implementing the gender plan of action, there's a real knowledge gap. And so I think that this is a great step forward in terms of filling that knowledge gap and identifying how we can better measure the interaction between gender and biodiversity in order to effectively plan. And so as we're moving forward, this is a knowledge gap that was certainly identified by the ATAG and is something that I think that parties will be very interested in. What you maybe saw in the documents that are going to SBSTTA 26 is that the ATAG made the decision to remove the indicators from the list for those indicators that were not functional. And the reason for this was not because those indicators are not important, not because those indicators are not worth pursuing, but they actually wanted to highlight to parties that these things are an area that needs developed, because by having it in the list, it made it look like it was done, right? It made it look like it was ready to be rolled out, as opposed to actually saying, listen, this is where we need to invest so that we can better improve monitoring systems. And so then in the recommendation for the ATAG, there is also this recognition that as indicators are developed, that we need to keep the list of complementary indicators under review. And if indicators were adopted in the context of the gender plan of action, or if they are adopted in the biodiversity and health decision, which is another place where indicators are being considered, including ones related to gender, then those would come into the list of indicators in the monitoring framework. And so that's sort of the logic that the ATAG has had. And I mean, I work at the Secretariat, so we are, of course, expected to be unbiased. But I do think that it is very useful for parties to say, here's what's available now, here's what's not available, but where we need to develop measures. And so this is what has been tried to or what they've tried to capture in that document. And I think that for this work that's happening now, it's great to get additional feedback and to make sure that the indicators that are being developed under this initiative are really policy relevant and really inform how the gender plan of action is being rolled out, which I think, I mean, I know the people on the team, and I think this is what everybody very much is interested in. So I think I'll leave it at that. And thank you very much for inviting me to the webinar today.
Thank you, Julia. And Beth, just to note that a few indicators from the SDGs obviously are included in the monitoring framework, including Target 23. James had some network problems, so he might be replying to your question instead of using the mic. Over to you, Mina.
Thanks, Catherine. There are two suggestions. One is if the methodology can be translated to Spanish and other languages, because then it would become easier to comment. And the other one relates to, I suggest that we meet in Cali, Colombia prior to COP16 in a pre-COP on gender, and in particular the gender plan of action. So these are just suggestions that are coming in.
Yeah, they are great suggestions. Thank you. And yes, I think an event pre-COP sounds good, sounds great, and we can start planning for that. In terms of the translation, that's a really good question, and that's something that we'll explore. And if we have funds available, we'll do that. We'll explore that with the team. Thank you.
I think we have answered most of the questions that were raised, but if there is anybody who would still like to speak, or if anybody has a comment, or a question, if you could just raise your hands and we can call you. Ciara Daniels, Ciara, go ahead.
Hi, thank you. Sorry, I wasn't seeing where to raise my hand. This is Kira Daniels from UNDP. Thank you so much for this presentation and for the draft methodology, and congratulations on putting it together. It's really exciting to see. I did share some of the same sort of questions on unpacking some of the nuances that others had. So it's good to get, hear more about that. My question though is, could you tell us more about how the evidence will be used? There's an option to something like, please, if available, share more. So it'd be good to know, what's the expectation there, and if you considered perhaps for you, the selection of the fully yes, maybe requiring evidence. Yeah, just if you could speak more about that. Thank you.
That's a great question. In terms of, and we're still trying to work out, and obviously this is some of the questions that we have for parties at this in-person meeting that will be happening at SABSTA. Some of the things that we need to check with them, first of all, is if this methodology would be useful for them to monitor progress towards Target 23 and the things that are that need to be included. In terms of the collection of evidence and further information, we thought that it was important, precisely because the gender plan of action, the indicative actions, and the possible deliverables are broad, to be able to unpack on how countries are implementing these actions. As Aisha noted earlier, there'll be different ways to implement those actions. And that option to provide examples was precisely to better understand the steps that countries are taking and the ways that they are approaching the different actions. What we envisaged was that this information can be compiled and be useful for sharing of best practices and knowledge exchange. This is obviously the role of the CBD Secretariat, and the information that is provided through reports. It'll be information that will be useful for example, for the progress reports, information that will be useful for countries themselves if they want to include it in their national reports. So we need to work out a way that this would be useful for as a knowledge exchange effort. But the way that we drafted the methodology is for parties' use. So in the end, they'll make the decisions about if this is useful, how they want to share the case studies, best practices. And yes, this is one of the things that we need to work out while we further develop the methodology. In terms of evidence of yes, partially no, I don't think parties are required to provide evidence for any of the indicators, headline, binary, and other indicators, but obviously it would be useful to have some examples to show evidence of progress towards these actions and progress towards achievement of Target 23, but especially as a knowledge exchange exercise. for parties to learn from one another. Hope that answered your question, Chiara.
Thank you. Yes, I think that does answer it. And I think it's interesting actually to think about what you would ask for in terms of lessons or case studies based on each question. And that actually could be the same or could be different than evidence of, say, a full yes, like evidence of, legislation in place or a budget in place or something like that. So just thinking about my question, that those are actually in a way two different things, the case studies and the evidence of meeting a full yes in particular. So yeah, I think maybe it's something to sort of think through more. And also at the same time not wanting to overburden countries with answering the questionnaire. But thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
We still have 5 minutes for the question and answer session. Any comments, any suggestions, any questions that anybody has? If you can just raise your hand, we can take it now. Also, James, if you are able to speak now, if you could answer Beth's question.
Minal, if I may, since we have a few more minutes and it seems like nobody's hand is up, I think this point that has come up around how we sort of dig a bit deeper into what the answers around yes or yes partially look like. I wanted to sort of contribute another sort of reflection that we had within the team in that discussion, because I think it's really, useful to put that out there so others can also reflect on it. But one of the sort of real conceptual challenges we had with this survey is that we need a sort of typology of answers that are simple and easy to respond to for parties. It's a common framework that everybody is using. But also there is this challenge about how we sort of capture more detail and, like you say, unpack slightly more what a yes partially answer might look like. Within that, also acknowledging that how parties implement these indicative actions will be so different from one party to the next based on a huge range of sort of national and contextual factors. So the real challenge is how to sort of develop these optional responses in a way that don't restrict the type of, response actions that parties can take, but still somehow allow us to, do a meaningful measure of how parties are progressing towards implementation of these indicative actions and Target 23 as a whole. So I just wanted to sort of put that on the table as well for reflection, because I think it is a really, really critical point, and I really hope we can together look into this a lot more to see what our options are.
And Gillian has her hand up. Maybe she has the answers for us. Gillian.
Thank you. I was just going to mention that I think for the people on the call, it may also be really interesting for you to look at the guidance that the AdTech has produced on considering Section C of the framework when implementing the monitoring framework. And I think we did a webinar on this yesterday, which is maybe interesting for people as well. I mean, as you know, it's not only about Target 23, but gender was highlighted as a cross-cutting issue for countries to consider when implementing every target. And so Section C of the framework was adopted in order to highlight these issues that cut across all of the framework and that should be considered in any action that's taken. And so in addition to gender, there's other considerations as well, like IPLCs and youth and age. But anyway, just in terms of how do you move forward, I think there's a few is there's a need to actually engage, have an inclusive process that develops the monitoring of the entire framework. So making sure that women are engaged in efforts related to monitoring and helping to establish what these indicators look like. And then in the monitoring framework, there's also these binary indicators, as you were suggesting, that will be in the national reports. And the idea here is that even though the point of these binary indicators is partially to inform the global review of progress, which would, collate across countries, it really also is aiming to provide a list of things that countries would need to consider as they are trying to achieve Target 23, and in this case, how are they considering Section C. And the way I see the methodology that you've developed is it would take that a step further for the countries who are interested at the national level and provide additional questions and additional considerations that will help them, help to establish what it is that may need to be considered as you are implementing the framework in terms of gender. But as you said, for every country, it's going to be different. And so I think it's not prescriptive. None of the conclusions are prescriptive, but it's more about trying to identify things that could be considered so that it puts everyone in a position to make effective policy. And so, as I said, just congratulations on the work. And I think that this is a step in the right direction. Thanks.
Thanks, Jillian. I think we are running out of time for the question and answer session. We would definitely want more of your comments, your questions, any suggestions that you have on the draft indicator methodology. So just to share, sorry, just give me a minute. Yeah. So just to share that we are seeking inputs on the draft till the 31st of May. And if you have any comments or questions, please do share it with Aisha. Her email ID is here, and we will also put it in our chat box. The draft methodology is available to read and download. Please read it, send your comments. Also, Catherine has already spoken about this, but we are planning an in-person exchange on the 12th of May between 10 a.m. and 1 p.m. in Nairobi during the SBSTTA 26 meeting. We will confirm the venue with you shortly, but we would encourage you to please participate in this event. And if there is any more information that you would need about the event and your participation, you can contact me, and my email ID is neenal.tatpati@women4biodiversity.org. So thank you very much to everybody who has participated, especially Jillian and James. Thank you for taking time out and coming for the webinar, and everybody else who has attended as well. I would also like to thank our interpreters for doing a fantastic job, and everybody who's joined in today. We look forward to your comments, and we look forward to seeing you at either the SBSTTA meetings and the SBI meetings or in COP, and between those two meetings for more webinars and virtual sessions that we may have. I would also now request you to please turn on your cameras so that we can take a picture.
Hi, everybody. So in 3, 2, 1. And we're done. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sumina. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for joining in, and a good day to everybody.
Thank you very much. This is Dr. Juliet from Nairobi, Kenya. I would like to attend in person. So kindly guide me on how I get accreditation or a day pass, the day pass for the grounds at the UN. I would love to attend the in-person meeting.
Sure, Juliet, if you could please.
Muchas gracias. Esperamos siempre las convocatorias y los documentos en español, si fuera posible. Gracias. Hasta luego. Desde Guatemala, saludos.
Thank you, Marina.
You're saying
Thank you
something?
very much.
Yes, how do I get to attend?
Yes, Juliet, if you could just share your email address in the chat, we will get back to you.
Oh, I just do it right away.